The IS-BAO SafetyNet webinar series presented today by IBAC IS-BAO and Polaris Aero. Today's topic is SMS beyond your organization. I'm Catherine Hilst, the IS-BAO Operations Manager. As the globally recognized voluntary safety standard, IS-BAO helps operators apply industry best practices by challenging them to review and compare their safety-related policies, processes, and procedures, and then make improvements, elevating them to the worldwide standard for business aviation. I have a couple of housekeeping items for everyone. Due to the number of attendees, audience members are on mute, and you'll be on mute through the presentation, but we do have a place for you to ask your questions, and we welcome those during the session. Just go to your questions drop-down, type in your question, and then we'll address them once the presentation is done. Today's SafetyNet webinar focuses on the importance of providing operational safety-related feedback to and implementing risk controls with organizations outside of your own and suggested methods for doing so. The interdependent nature of the aviation industry means that often, to mitigate a hazard as close to the root cause as possible, cooperation with other organizations and/or regulators is required. Whether it's ATC, a ground service provider, caterer, or another aircraft operator, we're all in the same way dependent on others to operate as safely and efficiently as possible. When coordinating with others, actionable database discussions are a key to explaining the why behind the proposed changes. These conversations should also be conducted in good faith, recognizing that each organization within the aviation industry is part of the same global team, and an increase in safe operation for one benefits all. Our presenter today is Jack Williamson, a safety consultant at Polaris Aero. Jack has his bachelor's degree in maintenance management from Middle Tennessee State and a master's in aviation safety from Embry-Riddle. He was commissioned in the Navy in 2012, where he flew P-3 Orion and P-8 Poseidon. He's a P-8 instructor pilot, aviation safety officer, CRM instructor, and a trained mishap investigator. He worked with Amazon Air as a senior program manager for the standards department and lives in Nashville with his wife, 2 kids, a dog, and 4 chickens. Jack, we're so happy to have you here today, and I will turn this over to you.
Thanks, Catherine. I really appreciate the introduction, and happy to be here giving my first SafetyNet webinar today and talking a little bit about interfacing with outside organizations and implementing risk controls in a way that we may not think about all the time. So we'll get rolling if I can click the right thing here. There we go. So what are we looking to do today? Our terminal objective is to leave empowered with tools to implement highly effective risk controls for your organization, which require coordination with and potentially changes to another organization. So basically, we're going to try to give you some best practices for having other people fix their mistakes that may have an adverse effect on you and your safety. Why do we need to talk about this? There might be some people on the call, your personality is such that you're like, oh, I love the opportunity to go tell other people why they're wrong and how they can fix themselves. But then others on the call, you might think about this and the awkwardness, the challenge of talking to someone else and trying to call out what they need to change is just a mountain too steep to climb, and you'd rather just stay kind of siloed in your organization and focus on what you can more easily control. So what I'll try to do today is one, describe why it's important to make that effort to interface with organizations outside of your own, and then give some tips and tricks, on how to most effectively do that. So, if you're that first personality, understanding there's a right and a wrong way to do that in a way that's going to be most effective, right? So not getting carried away in emotions and most effectively implement those risk controls as well. So to do that, we're going to start off with a quick review of SMS and look at where this external coordination fits in, where, why, when, where, why, and how that fits in. And then look at some regulations and some policy guidance supporting that and why we do that as well. Some of the SafetyNet webinars, they'll focus on SMS as like an overarching theory, kind of a science-based why we do SMS. Today we're going to try to focus and dive deep on 2 specific pillars of SMS, safety risk management and safety assurance, and go a little bit deeper in those. So not a higher level SMS, but we'll dive deep in those. Got a couple examples that we'll go over. The first one is a personal example from when I was in the Navy as a safety officer, called it new aircraft, same call sign. And then we'll look at a list of professional soft skills and look at that best practices for interfacing and how to best and most effectively interact with other organizations. Then we'll tie those into a second example called Boys Are Back in Town, a little Thin Lizzy reference for you. And then follow that up with some safety assurance and kind of wrap up that way. Some assumptions for the brief today. Like I said, we're not doing the like why is SMS important. So we're going to assume that you're at a point in your SMS journey that you've got a healthy, just culture, a good safety culture, and you've got good, honest, trustworthy reporting happening and no finger pointing. So I point that out in regard to external interface, because you want to make sure you're at a point where if you're getting data coming in that says, hey, this event happened because, I was given an instruction by somebody else, whatever. You just want to make sure that you can trust that this is not finger pointing, that if you're going to ask another organization to make some kind of a operational change, that it's done in good faith. So that's kind of our entering argument that we're at that point in our SMS journey for today's conversation. As promised, quick recap of SMS. So you see a diagram in the middle from the FAA with all 4 pillars. So you've got safety risk management, safety policy, safety assurance, and then surrounded by that is safety promotion. So all working together for that circular SMS process. But today, like I said, we'll be working primarily in the safety risk management component. And specifically when we identify hazards, analyze them, and start assessing risk controls. So taking a step back a little bit too, as we think about like, well, what's the bottom line, no kidding, purpose of all this effort for an SMS, right? We spend a lot of time, money, and effort on establishing this formalized process of risk management, hazard identification, all these things. What are we really trying to do? Bottom line is to achieve and maintain operational risk as low as reasonably practical, or ALARP, as I hear it called sometimes. Excuse me. So to do that, we identify hazards in a couple ways, either proactively through like a change management analysis or something like that, or maybe retroactively. Hopefully it's a small event that's occurred that is a leading indicator of a larger event. We can put in risk controls as necessary to prevent something happening farther down the road. But whatever it is, we end up going through some form of a root cause analysis, and one of the most common forms of that is you'll hear the 5 whys. You essentially act like my 3-year-old and ask why over and over until you get to the root cause. Why did this happen? Okay, well, why did that happen? And so on and so forth. At the Naval Safety School, at least when I was there, they presented the why exercise in a bit of a different fashion. And they basically said, ask why until you get to an organizational level root cause. And they did this for a couple reasons, and that seemed to make sense to me. First of all, you want to solve a problem at the organizational level, because let's say you have one pilot, one individual that essentially made a mistake, had a deviation of some kind. Well, everyone else in the organization obviously is subject to the same training, the same policies, the same equipment, the same environment as that person. So it stands to reason that if that person had that deviation or made that mistake, then somebody else either has already and it just wasn't reported, or is going to soon make that same type of error. So implement a risk control that affects everyone, and so you can prevent that from happening again. And then secondly, the organizational level is the lowest level that you can really, very readily make changes to, right? You can change your own policies, you can change your training plan and all those types of things. You can make changes to your organization a lot easier and faster than normal, or than others. There was a caveat though that you should always at least think about, can we go a level deeper? and affect change outside of our organization to further reduce our risk to a lower price. Like, what is the actual lowest practical level? So an example that I remember being used there was, say you've got an airplane sitting on a ramp, no power on the airplane, it's not moving, thunderstorm rolls through, gets struck by lightning, you've got damage. Really easy from a safety department standpoint to go, okay, well, that's kind of it's an exposure, or we call it an act of God in the Navy, essentially, where I'm just file that away for reporting so I can track the damage. But keeping in mind, well, okay, let's still do a root cause analysis. And well, why was the airplane out on the ramp during a thunderstorm? And you start drilling into, well, we were facility limited. Why were we limited? Maybe we're resource limited there. And you can take that data to someone else outside the organization, ask for more resources to solve that problem there. So at least you can gather data and make this a collaborative SMS process. So always thinking about that. So to take that a step farther, at Bombardier Safety Stand Down a few weeks ago, one of the presenters, Dr. Ivan Popolitti, presented a little twist on the 5 whys exercise and said, basically, paraphrasing a little bit, but start your whys, not just why did this happen, but why did this make sense to this individual at the time, in this scenario, in these conditions and things like that. And I think that does a good job of framing the root cause analysis exercise in a couple ways, but primarily it starts off by doing this exercise in a form of trust, right? So you acknowledge that this situation could have happened, this error could have been made by anybody. So we're not assigning blame and saying, well, this mishap occurred, this deviation occurred because this person was incorrect, period. You're acknowledging that there's underlying causes that could lead to that, and again, giving the benefit of the doubt to that person. And then that'll also help you as you go through that process to find a more valid or more correct root cause, right? Because whether that person is, maybe it was their fault, but there was contributing things that made it their fault, right? So as you go through that, one of the more common things that could make a deviation make sense to someone at that time is they're trying to follow an instruction from an outside entity, right? Both the examples I've got today are ATC related, but they don't have to be, right? So you could be following an instruction by ATC, trying to make your operation fit with theirs, trying to fit your operation of an airplane into their controlling of the airspace. But it also checks if you're following marshaling instructions or whatever it might be. When you're trying to fit your operation into someone else's, it could make sense that a deviation could occur, especially if it's an on-the-fly type thing. This is not something that's necessarily been pre-briefed, dynamic scenario. So as we're doing that, that's certainly a contributing factor in that root cause analysis. And then you can go down and say, okay, what organizational level changes do we need to put in place from training, from process, to work around that? And then take it a step further and examine, is there anything that other organization, put yourself in their shoes, that they realistically could change as well, that would have a positive impact on our safety, on their safety, and just aviation safety in general, that rising tides raise all ships type thing. So this might be focused on your organization and theirs, but ultimately will benefit others as well. So with that, we'll look at some policy guidance straight out of the IS-BAO guidance for FAA Part 5. You've got the FAA verbiage up there at the top, but then I've highlighted here the way IBAC describes this, and they said it really well, so I'll just read it for you. The success of an operator's activities, including from a safety perspective, does not only depend on the management of their internal hazards and risks, but also on the management, or at least awareness of, external hazards and risks. Many are related to or caused by other organizations in which the operator must interface to conduct its own activities. So I think that does a great job of highlighting the interactive and interdependent nature of aviation, right? And so, and acknowledges that while, ultimately as my company or my organization's safety officer, I'm primarily concerned about my people and my operation, making them safe. But this is also helping others improve too. You can only fix what you know about. And so calling out, doing this in a collaborative way really helps the industry as a whole. So I've also highlighted just the kind of side-by-side Part 5 versus Annex 19. Big takeaway is that it's mentioned in both. I've highlighted there at the bottom this framework of external interface. It's implied throughout Annex 19 and mentioned specifically as well. Excuse me. So it's not just the FAA, but it's international as well. And I'll take a minute to mention, some other industry programs we've got, like safety report sharing through programs like ASIAS and ASAP. You got industry forums, safety stand downs, local safety roundtables. All those are fantastic, and they're necessary for awareness and information sharing. But they're really more that general awareness, useful for that. What we're really focusing on today is when you've got a more focused, risk control that you're trying to implement with another organization, and how to make that interaction go as smoothly as possible. So how are we trying to do that? Obviously, database collaboration there on the left is going to yield better results than a deflection and blame, hard confrontational type scenario. This seems obvious when you put these two pictures next to each other here, ground speed 0. But especially if, that first personality that I talked about, if you're, ready to go and just, oh, yep, this was their fault, and like, this is great. I get to go tell ATC what they did wrong. This is awesome. Or just, if the situation was severe enough, it's really easy to get caught up in the emotion of, this was almost catastrophic for one of my people or for myself, and go full blast and kind of let into somebody. But hopefully from this brief today, you'll take a second and remember that the ultimate goal is to implement an effective risk control. So taking some time to make the interaction the right way is going to be most effective, and don't just go in, guns a-blazing. All right. With that, we'll get into the first example. So like I said, the personal example here, I was a brand new safety officer in our fleet squadron. We had just transitioned from the P3 Orion, you see there on the right, to the P8 Poseidon there on the left, 737 variant. We were also a brand new organization to the Whidbey Island, Washington area. You see up there to the north on the sectional cutout there. Just moved up there from Hawaii. Finishing up our transition as a group, so we all are brand new to the airplane. And of note, we kept our same call sign when we moved to this area. We were the Skinny Dragon, so we were Dragon, and each aircraft commander had their own number. So I was Dragon 16. So as we're integrating in the area, we get through the transition. We're starting to operate and do training missions and things like that. We're going to the same area that the existing P3 squadrons, and again, we were the first P8 squadron up on the West Coast. We're going to some of the same operating areas, using canned routes or stereo routes, filed routes that P3s have been using for decades at this point. So they're even called Orion 1, 2, 3, etc. So long story short, we a couple months in start seeing a trend of unstable approaches, go-arounds, and things like that coming into Whidbey Island, specifically coming up from the south. first assumption, as well, we're new to the airplane, descent planning, that's kind of a big thing in a jet like this. So people are probably just getting behind the airplane and not planning their descents right. So we do some pilot interviews and dig through the reports and stuff like that, and realize that for the most part, people are doing what they're supposed to do or trying to. And there's also a trend of late descents or slam dunk arrivals, we call them. So the most egregious one I had, I think I was at about 15,000 feet, 10 miles from the airfield, and then given a descent down to initial approach altitude that was like 2,500 feet or something like that. So didn't quite make it. Had to get some vectors for the descent, but that trend was occurring. So we started doing some investigation called local air traffic controllers, which were Navy approach controllers. So it felt a little bit safer, a little bit at home. And we did have one pilot that got a phone number, no pilot deviation, but they got a phone number to say like, hey, what was going on with this? And ended up digging in and finding out, they got us in touch with SeaTac and started having a conversation with them and realized, they kind of admitted, oh, well, we saw similar call signs to P3s on these Orion routes going to these same working areas. We kind of assumed they're P3s and we're controlling them as such. A descent like that in the P3, kind of no problem, maybe even enjoy it, doing a practice emergency descent and screaming out of the sky. So, through that collaborative process, I offered, well, should we change our call sign? We could. I know down in Jacksonville, with the first area to transition, a couple units changed their call sign and added an 8 to the beginning, so we'd be Dragon 816 now to kind of call attention to that. And their leadership acknowledged and said, yeah, we appreciate the offer, but we'll make a note of this. We'll pass around some training and things like that, and maybe in the future we'll need to work through better options to work you around the airspace or whatever that is. So it started a collaborative process. As a result, pilot or unstable approaches and started decreasing drastically. Also, we started getting more used to the airplane and stuff like that, but we saw a much more reasonable descent profile and stuff like that coming up from the south. So what did we learn from that? First of all, change management. So interfacing with outside organizations at the right level through your change management process. So I have to assume, maybe incorrectly, but that at some point along the way, big Navy leadership, Department of Defense leadership interfaced with Seattle, airspace, that this major platform shift is coming. I know we were going through a lot of change management at our local unit level, but there's that mid-level of, wing leadership essentially in the military that would be responsible for these types of standard routes and all these kinds of local area agreements that seemingly was maybe, if they weren't left out of the process, they were not included to the point that they should be, maybe, right? So takeaway for us as civilian operators, if you're going through a major change in your organization, do that, that mind exercise of change management, sit around a table and talk about what are all the things that could need to be managed and controlled throughout this process, and make sure that's interfaced at the right level. So maybe that requires talking to your local airport manager, talking to some local FSDO folks on best practices with new equipment coming in, or whatever that might be. Just think through that and don't hesitate to do that. Again, come with some data. Again, we'll hammer on that here again in just a minute. But even if that data is kind of theoretical, take some aircraft performance data and how you think this might affect your new scenario, and work through that process together. Why do I think they were so receptive to just basically acknowledging that they were making false assumptions and things like that, and working together? I came to SeaTac, this conversation with SeaTac with data, right? So I had, I think, 4 or 5 safety reports that were pretty detailed about the late descent, and then how pilots acknowledging that they got behind the airplane, ended up getting unstable and going around, and they were identifying that it started with this late descent, and even acknowledge some of the things that they did to try and, query ATC for a descent and earlier descent and things like that. So I was able to bring that data to them, and then kind of by accident, I approached it with some of these soft skills that we'll talk about in a second. And a lot of it I say by accident because I was a brand new safety officer, relatively young, and it was my first time interacting with a regulatory agency, especially the FAA, and asking them to kind of going, hey, I'm suspecting that you guys were doing something not so great, and can you please change? So after that, I kind of did a postmortem, and I thought should make this more of a repeatable thing, and kind of got interested in this soft skills thing. So that is what we will talk about now. So 7 recommendations for soft skills best practices when you're interacting with other organizations. And it starts off with, relationship first communication. So they say start by reaffirming shared goals, mutual interest, or common responsibilities. This will reduce defensiveness and set a cooperative tone. So I added there in the blue that, when you do this, you want to be careful to not sound condescending with it though, right? So if you say something like, well, I know we both value safety above all else, it kind of implies that but you're not actively doing that. So my recommendation would be go lean towards the shared goal being their goal. So hey, we're trying to best comply with your controlling directions, but can you help us in understand the intent behind those, or and then explain what your constraints are as well within that conversation. Hey, it's difficult for us to descend that fast, especially descend and decelerate at the same time, all those kinds of things. And then along with that, use neutral observable facts with that explanation. So SMS data, right? So whether that's coming from safety reports or FOCA data or whatever, however that information is coming into your system, have it formalized and bring that with you to the conversation. And explain that the impact on safety. So a lot of times this is probably going to be relatively obvious. You're talking to other aviation professionals. They understand why an unstable approach and multiple go-arounds is a safety concern, but sometimes it might not be as obvious, and so you make sure you give that so what to them. Invite collaboration, not compliance. So the next 3 really kind of tie together, but it's asking questions. Is there better things that we can do to comply? And just starting that back and forth conversation. I've underlined here, if you can let changes to their operation be their idea, that's ideal, right? So if you explain the situation and that so what piece, and your constraints, why you need to operate the way you are, and hopefully you've come already with some internal organizational risk controls that you're either have applied or are going to apply, then they can come to the determination on their own, like, okay, I've got some wiggle room in my operation. I didn't realize the effect it was having on this this organization over here, and we can make some changes there. Along with that, they might not be able to change a whole lot. So number 5, they respect their constraints. They may be kind of doing the best they can, at which point we have to go back to the drawing board and look at our own process and procedures to reduce risk if we need to there. And then offer support and resource problem solving. Again, a collaborative effort. Hey, would it be better if we changed our example from Whidbey Island? Would it be better if we start going around Seattle versus trying to come in over the top or whatever that is? And then finally, make sure you're setting away, you're finalizing a time and confirming a time to follow up, right? So, review what you've decided you're going to do together, and then set a time to reconvene. Like, I'll give you a call on or have a meeting on this time, And then when you do that, again, come with data. So perfect opportunity to set up a safety performance indicator, an SPI. We want to reduce our unstable approaches by this number or this percent by 6 months or 3 months, whatever, within this quarter. And then you can look at progress as you go along and then bring that with you. You can reevaluate together. Are we having the desired effect that we want? Maybe yes, but what is the impact to each other's operations also? Because we've both changed how we were operating a little bit. Are things still working for you guys down in the control tower? How are they working for us, and back and forth? So hopefully it's great. If it's could be better, you can tweak it from there. So the ultimate goal of using these soft skills is, again, to reduce defensiveness, build trust, keep discussions fact-based, encourage shared solutions rather than compliance, and strengthen long-term partnerships. So using some of those techniques, it will make it more likely for the other organization to listen openly, stay engaged, and commit to change. So you make them part of the team, and acknowledge that, like Catherine said at the beginning, we are all one big aviation team, and get that buy-in from the other organization to help you out. Just as a, oh, by the way, on that topic, we've got a handout for you today that it's a little bit, it's longer than this. It's got more in there, but it's just a sample here that, maybe some time goes by from having this brief, and you have to have this type of interaction. Hopefully pull it out and use this as a way to kind of recage your brain before you go into that interaction. And it's even got some communication templates if you're going to start the conversation via email or phone or in-person meeting, something like that. Just gives you some examples of things you might want to say. It's not necessarily aviation specific, so you might put your own twist on it there, but hopefully that's a useful tool for you. All right. All right, with that, I'll move into a second example. So the boys are back in town. This is a FOQA example. So the first one, we got safety reports coming in, and then this is an even more objective data source. FOQA reports coming off the airplane. Operator based out of Vegas started seeing, again, a trend of unstable approaches and long landings and those types of things. And then noticed that it was primarily, or maybe even only, at home base there in Vegas. So safety officer goes and starts, just asks the tower, or approach rather, hey, what's going on? We're seeing this trend. Can you help us understand this? And basically the response, something along the lines of, yeah, isn't that great? We're like keeping you guys out of the airline sequence. We're getting you in. We know the local tail number, and you guys are great about, getting in fast and getting off the runway, things like that. So then they were able to share, like, well, that's great. We appreciate the intent, but here's some data, and here's the effect it's having on us. The unstable approaches are one thing, but then you can also share data about maybe that's causing maintenance issues with your brakes are wearing out faster than they should, or you're getting customer complaints that this is kind of a scary way to come in, or whatever that is, and then build the more complete perspective between the two. So, the operator now understands, like, well, the tower's kind of trying to help us out and help themselves out by keeping us out of the scheduled airline traffic flow, but also get us, out of the way. They feel like it's a benefit. And then on the controller side, that perspective, like, well, this is, maybe, yeah, we're getting on the ground faster, but we're doing a lot of other things that are not ideal as well. So as you work through that, you find a middle ground and find a solution that works better for everybody. A note too, if they're saying, hey, we recognize a local tail number, then you're probably helping out other base tenants or other folks in that environment as well. So you're almost expanding your organization, right? When I talked about organizational level risk controls earlier, and people are operating in the same environment and the same conditions, your local airport, brothers and sisters are same thing. So we're helping each other out there as well. So to review some of those skills and how they apply to this scenario. So again, begin with relationship first communication. That shared goal. Keep in mind in some scenarios like this, your shared goal may be implied that we're just both local to the Vegas area here. So you could start the conversation completely unrelated and just, hey, how you see how the Golden Knights did last night? You know, whatever it is, acknowledging we're both locals. We both have an assumed shared interest in safety, safe operations, and improvement of our local environment here. Again, bring the neutral observable facts. Focal data is fantastic for that because you just go, look, the airplane's telling the story right here. We did some pilot interviews. Here's what they're saying is going on. Let's, you know, that's so what that I talked about there. Number 3, that's where you may have to go, well, okay, unstable approach, you're coming in fast, long landing, but hey, you're getting off the runway, like nobody's run long. Then you can get it, well, yeah, but we're burning up brakes, it's costing us money, all these other things. Invite collaboration, like I said, find the middle ground. Hey, we also don't want to sit out in airline traffic. We know you don't want us clobbering up your sequence or whatever, and then work that together. And then again, confirm a follow-up. Hey, this is what we're going to do, and we'll reconvene and talk to you about it and see how it's going at this point in time. On that note, safety assurance. So it's really important, as I've mentioned a couple of times, to do that follow-up. So internally, you want to be consistently monitoring this, making sure that the trend, you're trending in a positive way, and you know, analyzing in between the time you've set to reconvene with this other organization. Are there little things that we can tweak internally that might improve things, or do I need to go back and talk to them in the meantime? Always make sure you bring data. So, right, so have some way to gather the data on this specific event, whether, you know, SPIs or whatever that is, whatever form of data collection you use, have some way to present that in a clear, concise fashion so you can show hopefully a positive trend. But if it's maybe not trending up as much as you want, again, these things can be tweaked. Okay, so big takeaways from today. Acceptable or ALARP risk mitigation doesn't always end inside our organization. Sometimes it is practical to go a level deeper and interface with others outside of our organization. External risk controls may be awkward or difficult, but they're worth doing for the sake of safety. There's a right and a wrong way to handle these interactions that are gonna, and when I say that, I don't mean just from like a, hey, just be nice to folks, but there's a more effective way to do that if you approach it and so that the other person is less defensive, you have a higher chance of getting your risk controls implemented and increasing your safety, which is the main point. We're all in this together. I say this, you know, aviation, one big team, even though we might be competitors in business sometimes, but hopefully that reduces some of that anxiety if you have it of interfacing with somebody else. Like, we're all in this together. We all want to be safe, even if we're, you know, a business competitor. And then finally, an actual takeaway. Hopefully you take that handout with you and that's useful to you if you ever have to have one of these types of interactions. So hopefully now we're leaving empowered with some tools to make better and more effective risk controls outside your organization. And I would be happy to connect with anybody. There we go. There's my email and phone number. Oh, flashed away. But yeah, I really appreciate that. And I guess that went away. So I'll get Catherine to send that up. I want to talk more.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much, Jack. That was really valuable information. We definitely are all a one big happy aviation industry, right? So there's several questions here. The first one that came in was how to download the handout, and that response is available for folks to see in the comments. You should have a handouts drop down, and if you click on that, you'll see the PDF for Job Aid Professional. Click on that and it'll either open in your browser or it may just download automatically, kind of depending on your computer. All right. So first question, do you have any recommendations for when you might want to move from an informal collaboration to something more formalized like an LOA? So I guess, you know, from a phone call to we need to formalize this, what's kind of the trajectory there?
That's a great question. Exactly when, I think it's going to be situationally dependent. But so I think back when I was doing some airspace integration back in the Navy for large UAS, and we started having a lot of very positive conversations back and forth with local airspace agencies down in Jacksonville. And then the conversations, the people started basically conveniently misremembering things that we had essentially had a handshake agreement on. And I think, you know, if you start seeing stuff like that, obviously a good time to start putting things into writing and making it a lot more formal. It gets a little bit more contentious when you have to do that. But at the end of the day, you know, you need to make sure that you're backing yourself up. And, you know, luckily we were able to, you know, going back to sharing data, we had emails and things like that too, to say, like, well, we didn't sign it, but it's in your email, and this is what we said we were going to do, and things like that. So try to remain obviously as cordial as possible, understanding their constraints, because maybe something came up that changes their point of view. But at the end of the day, whatever changes you need to make, if it's really important for your operation, just start time to put it in writing and maybe raise it up the chain of command if you need to.
Good advice. So maybe sort of semi-formal phone call, emails, and then elevate that as needed. Yeah. A quick question here on, well, actually it's a little longer than quick. How do you see this being handled with external vendors and partners? Are leaders meeting on certain intervals to review the friction between organizations? Thinking specifically about training providers, third-party maintenance, et cetera.
Yeah, so we've got a couple of clients that are having basically quality escape issues with different third-party providers, and they've instituted essentially like a quarterly business review, and it's kind of, again, one of those instances where it's like, well, this is maybe a little bit awkward. I'm having to kind of formally call you out for not performing up to standard, but if you do it, you know, understanding again, it's business, it's not personal, but also business is kind of personal too. So doing it the right way is important. But yeah, instituting those quarterly business reviews seem to be relatively effective, as long as that data is brought and it's approached, again, not in a avoid blame, I guess, is, you know, hey, we're trying to figure, here's what we're seeing, we're really trying to figure this out, with the assumption that that third-party vendor is also doing the best that they can, and go into it with that mindset.
All right, it kind of leads into the next question. Do you have any suggestions if the outside organization isn't so willing to come to the table?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it kind of depends on, you know, who it is. If it's the FAA, it's kind of like, well, I mean, I guess I'll move to Europe. I don't know, but no, you know, I guess if it's those quarterly business reviews, you can always basically elevate to, hey, we're not getting the service we expect, or you told us you were going to provide. We're going to have to go to somewhere else, you know. So certainly a way to elevate that, and hopefully you don't have to get there. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Let's see, where am I? There is another question that's specific to Vocus and exporting your SPI data, and I'm thinking that's something that would best be done offline with you all directly. And since your slide disappeared, can you give me a good contact email?
J. Williamson at polarisaero.com, or I can type it in here too.
Sure. All right. So yeah, if you have specific Vocus questions, There it is, J. Williamson at polarisaero.com. Oops, let me actually, I'm going to do this. Type this, anyone feel free to correctly. And I'll put your email in, and that is going to everybody. So you now have Jack's email. And I just want to say thank you so much for being here today and sharing this, what I think is incredibly valuable information. You need to look not only internally, but at all the places where we interface with others in this industry. So really appreciate the perspective on this. This has been recorded, so you all can share this. Don't forget to download the handout. That will also be available to download with the recording. So thank you all for being here. Jack, thank you, and Polaris Aero for joining with us. I look forward to our next series with you all in the new year. And I want to wish everybody happy holidays, and we will see you in 2026.
See you, everybody.